do not know who is out there anymore. I do not know how far this signal reaches. I do not know if you are hearing this in a car, in a basement, in a break room, in the back of a semi, in some small town where the lights still turn on. If you can hear a human voice right now, that is enough to start. My name is Mateo Alvarez. Most people call me Matt. I am 38 years old. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I used to talk for a living, mostly about normal life, weather, traffic, high school football, and whatever small fight was happening at city council that week. I was not important. I was just there, in the background while people drove to work. Now I am doing the same thing, except work does not exist the way it used to, and the weather is not weather anymore. This is a running account from the last place I could keep a microphone powered, from the last set of walls that can still hold out dust. If you are hearing this and you are indoors, stay indoors. If you are hearing this and you are thinking about making a run for supplies, listen to the end first. If you are hearing this and you are on the road, I need you to make a hard decision based on your air filter, your fuel, and your distance to real shelter. Not a tent, not a car. Real shelter. I'm going to tell you what happened here. I am going to keep it raw. No slogans. No official voice. No pretending I know more than I do. I'm going to tell you the exact mistakes I watched people make, and the few things that actually worked. It started for us with a storm that had a name people used as a joke. Haboob. You heard that word before, probably on some clip from Phoenix. A wall of dust rolling in. It used to be a once-in-a-while thing. It used to be a video for social media. In Albuquerque, dust storms were a nuisance. You close the windows, you rinse your car, you cough a little, you complain, you move on. In the spring of 2027, it stopped being a nuisance. It became the main feature of the day. Then it became the main feature of the week. Then it became the thing that decided who could breathe and who could not. I keep dates because that is how my brain stays steady. The first day I wrote, "This feels different" in my notebook was Tuesday, April 15th, 2027. I got to the studio at 6:10 in the morning. Normal drive down I-25. The Sandia Mountains were still there, but washed out, the ridgeline faint. The sun came up red, not pretty, just wrong. The weather report said high winds in the afternoon, blowing dust. Visibility issues along I-40 out by Laguna and Grants. Normal language for something that was not normal. At 10:30 in the morning, the first calls came in. A woman from Moriarty said she could not see the next mailbox. A truck driver said a brown curtain hit him west of Tijeras, and he had to stop in the right lane because he could not find an exit. He sounded embarrassed for saying it out loud. He said he had been driving 20 years and never had to stop in the lane. At 1:50 in the afternoon, the wind hit the building hard enough that a panel in the ceiling rattled loose. Dust came down through a vent that should have been sealed. That is where I noticed it. It was not just sand. It was fine. It stuck to sweat. It coated everything. It did not fall fast. It hung. By 3 in the afternoon, the city disappeared past the river. The skyline went flat. You could stand at Central and look east, and you could not pick out the outline of the mountains. We stayed on air until the first power sag. Our lights flickered. The board rebooted once. Our engineer, Jim Waller, went into the back room to check the air handling unit, and he came out with his face gray. Not fear gray, dust gray. Jim said our intake filters were already loading up, and the pressure differential was climbing. That is the first technical thing I'm going to say, because it matters. Most buildings pull outside air. That is how people avoid carbon dioxide buildup, how they keep air from going stale. You can have a strong heating and cooling system and still get destroyed if your intake does not have enough filtering. Jim said the filter bank was not built for this. Most places are not. He said we could keep running, but we would be pulling dust through the system, coating coils, clogging everything, and eventually pushing the same dust into the studios. I asked him how long we had. He said, hours maybe, or less if the wind keeps climbing. That afternoon, the city sent out its first shelter indoors message. It hit phones. It went on highway signs. It was polite. It asked people to avoid driving. It asked people with respiratory issues to stay inside. It assumed you had a place to go, and it assumed you had time. That night, I drove home with both hands on the wheel and my headlights on, going 20 miles an hour on surface streets because I could not trust the lanes. I passed 2 wrecks I could barely see until the last second. Nobody was out directing traffic. The dust ate sound. You could not tell where anything was. At home, my wife Elena had taped the sliding door seams and stuffed towels along the bottom. She is a respiratory therapist. She does not panic. She does triage in her head without talking about it. She had our son Lucas in his room with a small portable air cleaner running, and she had already swapped the furnace filter out for a thicker one we kept for wildfire season. She told me to strip in the laundry room. Shoes off, clothes into a trash bag, shower fast, hair rinse. It felt dramatic. It was correct. If you track dust inside and you are living in it for days, you lose the small advantage you have. We ate dinner without turning on the kitchen vent because the vent would have pulled outside air through cracks. We ate in the living room with one lamp on. Even then, you could see dust in the beam, not floating down, just hanging. That was day 1. If this had been a normal disaster, it would have eased. The wind would have died. The dust would settle. Street sweepers would roll. People would post photos. The news would move on. This did not ease. Wednesday, April 16th, the morning light was the same red. The Weather Service issued a high wind warning, then a blowing dust advisory, then another message about low visibility. Words stacked on words. Elena went to her shift at the hospital anyway. Presbyterian on the west side was already seeing people with asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease coming in early. Not because the storm was worse than yesterday, but because it never stopped. People never got a clean air break. I went back to the studio. Jim met me in the parking lot and told me not to go in through the main doors because the lobby had turned into a dust trap. He walked me around back through the loading door and handed me a half-face respirator with new cartridges. He said, "Put it on before you go inside." Inside the building, the air smelled dry and metallic. The filters were already getting overwhelmed. Dust had started coating the sound panels in the hall. Studio 2, the small one, had a faint haze. That is how fast it moved. We stayed on air because people were calling. People in Rio Rancho could not see across the street. People out in the South Valley said power lines were whipping. A guy near the airport said he saw a small plane try to taxi and then stop and shut down because the pilot could not see the next marker. At 11:20 in the morning, we got a call from a woman in Gallup. She said the dust had moved in from the west, and it was worse than anything in her memory. She said she was Navajo, and her grandfather used to talk about dust storms from stories, and she thought it was an exaggeration. She said it was not an exaggeration. Then the phone lines started dropping. Not all at once. You would get a call and it would cut mid-sentence. You would try to call back and it would not connect. That was the first sign that the network was starting to fail in uneven patches. At 2:40 in the afternoon, our transmitter site out on the mesa took a hit. Not a physical hit, a fault. The engineer on duty there called and said the cooling fans were struggling because dust was clogging the screens. He said he had never seen dust load up that fast. He said he was going to shut down for a maintenance cleaning and try to come back up. We dropped off the air for 12 minutes. During those 12 minutes, people started calling my personal cell, people I had not talked to in years, a cousin in El Paso, a friend from college in Denver, my old neighbor in Las Cruces. All of them asking the same question in different words. Is this just us? It was not just us. Denver had blowing dust from eastern Colorado. Lubbock had zero visibility on parts of the loop. Amarillo had pileups on I-40. Kansas had dust storms on top of drought fields. This was not a single haboob. This was multiple regions feeding dust into the air at once. You can argue about why. climate, land use, farming practices, drought cycles, water mismanagement. All of it matters, but none of it mattered in that moment because the air was turning into a hazard you could not outmuscle. Your lungs do not care about politics. Your eyes do not care about opinions. That night, Elena came home with red marks on her face from a tight mask. She sat at the kitchen table and told me the emergency department had set up extra intake screening. They were sending home anyone stable with instructions to shelter and use inhalers. They were keeping anyone who needed oxygen. She said they were already short on respiratory equipment because supply shipments were delayed. I asked about staff. She said some people could not make it in because they got stuck on the road when visibility dropped. She said one nurse got into a fender bender in the parking lot because she could not see a parked car. Thursday, April 17th, the city finally said, "Do not drive." Not a request, a directive. The state police started blocking some highways when the worst gusts hit. Schools closed. Most businesses closed. The airport shut down. Flights stopped. That is another technical thing. Planes can fly above dust, but takeoff and landing are the problem. Engines ingest particles. Visibility drops. Instrument approaches need ground conditions to meet minimums. If the air turns into a brown wall at runway level, the airport is done. That was the day I saw the first run on filters. Not food, not water, filters. People went to hardware stores for furnace filters and shop vacuum filters. People bought box fans. People bought tape. People bought plastic sheeting. They were trying to build clean rooms in houses that were never designed to be sealed. Some of that worked. Some of it was panic buying. If you are hearing me now and you have filters, do not waste them. Layering filters in a way that blocks all airflow does not help. You need air movement and filtration together. A box fan with a good filter taped to the intake can create a survivable room. It will not be perfect. It can be the difference between coughing for hours and being able to sleep. That same day, the solar farms west of town started dropping output. Dust coats panels fast. Panels need light. You can still get power through haze, but if the panel's surface is coated, your output falls hard. People who built plans around clean solar power learned fast that dust is not just a visibility problem, it is a power problem. On Thursday night at 8:45, we had the first rolling outage in our neighborhood. 15 minutes off, 40 minutes on, then off again. The power company said it was a load management. It was also equipment. Dust on insulators can lead to flashover when humidity changes. Dust gets into cooling intakes. Dust gets into switches and contacts. Dust turns maintenance into a constant fight. Friday, April 18th, the hospital called Elena and asked if she could do an extra shift. She said no, not because she did not care, because Lucas was starting to cough at night even with the room filter running. He is 8. He tries to act tough and then he forgets and he rubs his eyes and then his eyes get red and he looks at you with that quiet question kids have when they think you are hiding the truth. I stayed home and tried to make the house hold air better. I taped the return vents so we could control where the furnace pulled air from. I changed the filter again. It was already loaded. That is not normal. That is days of wildfire ash level loading. But it was dust, fine enough that it packed into the fibers. I built a second box fan filter setup in Lucas's room and another in our bedroom. Elena checked my work and fixed the gaps because she has that kind of brain. She does not argue. She just makes it correct. Saturday, April 19th, we got our first ashfall, except it was not ash. It was dust thick enough to settle on surfaces indoors, even with windows shut. That means your building is leaking. All buildings leak. You cannot stop it completely unless you have a sealed structure with controlled pressure. Most of us do not. That afternoon, I drove to the studio because Jim said he wanted help moving gear. The company had decided to suspend operations, not permanently, just until conditions improve. That is corporate language for we do not know. Jim met me outside wearing goggles. He handed me a respirator and told me to keep my mouth closed when we opened the door. Inside, the lobby had a visible layer of dust on the floor. People had tracked it in, then it just kept sifting in through every crack. We went to my office and I grabbed my small portable recorder, my notebook, and the old handheld microphone I liked because it sounded warm. Jim pulled a small transmitter unit from a rack and said he was going to try to keep a minimal broadcast running from a more sealed location off the main building system. I asked him where. He said the County Emergency Operations Center had a room with better filtration and backup power. He said they were letting certain communications people set up there because their own channels were getting overloaded. That night, Elena and I had the first real argument of this whole thing. She did not want me going anywhere. She said every time I opened a door, I brought dust back. She said the city was going to get worse, not better. I told her if I could help keep information moving, it might matter. I did not say it dramatically. I said it because I needed to believe I was useful. She stared at me for a long time and then said, "If you go, you sleep there. You do not come home and contaminate this place." That is how my life split into two locations. Home, where my kid tried to stay calm. The county building, where the air was still thin and gritty, but survivable. Sunday, April 20th. The first fatal pileup happened on I-40 eastbound near Moriarty. The news said multiple vehicles, low visibility, chain reaction. The number of dead changed every hour because nobody could get responders in safely. I heard the dispatch audio later from a friend in the fire department. I am not going to repeat it. It was people trying to do their jobs while blind. It was responders trying to find vehicles by touch. It was the sound of a world that still had rules trying to function after the rules stopped matching reality. That same day, the governor issued a state of emergency. The language expanded from avoid driving to stay sheltered to non-essential movement prohibited. In practice, it meant police and National Guard tried to keep people from wandering outside during the worst hours. It was uneven. Some neighborhoods listened, some did not. Some people took it as a challenge. Monday, April 21st, I moved into the County Emergency Operations Center. It sits near downtown in a building that looks boring from outside. Inside, it has thick walls, a separate air system, and a generator that is meant for short-term disasters. Short-term. That phrase mattered later. Jim and I set up in a small room with a table, 2 folding chairs, and a power strip. We ran a microphone into a small mixer. We ran that into the transmitter. It was not fancy. It was stable. We had an antenna line out to the roof that someone had already set up for emergency communications. The county emergency manager, a woman named Patricia Gomez, came by and told us the ground rules. No rumors. No naming private citizens as criminals. No telling people to rush any location. Keep it practical. Keep it calm. I said I could do that. I meant it. That is when I started doing this kind of broadcast. The kind where you are not competing for ratings. You are just trying to keep people from making the worst decision at the worst time. Day after day, the dust kept coming. Sometimes it lightened for an hour and you could see 2 blocks instead of 1. People would step outside and think it was ending. Then the wind would shift and it would slam back down. We got reports from West Texas, then from Oklahoma, then from Kansas City, then from Chicago. People think of dust storms as a desert thing. When the air mass is loaded and the winds are right, it can move far. The Midwest had its own dry fields. The Great Plains had topsoil that was turning into airborne powder. You could track it on satellite images when the satellite still fed. Brown plumes stretching across states. At night, you could see it in streetlight halos. A glowing haze, then the lights went out. The first big system failure here was water pressure. Not that the water stopped completely at first. It was pressure drops and boil notices. Water plants need power and maintenance. Filters, pumps, valves, operators who can get to work. Albuquerque pulls water from surface and groundwater sources. The distribution system is large. Dust storms do not directly poison the water in your pipes, but they strain everything around the system. Power dips knock pumps offline. Staff shortages slow repairs. People start using more water at home because they stop bathing normally and instead rinse dust off constantly, rinse filters, rinse floors. Demand changes. One afternoon, we got word that one of the big pump stations had shut down due to overheating. Intake screens were loading with debris. Dust was getting into vents. People forget that dust is not just tiny particles. In high winds, you get grit. You get plant matter. You get trash lifted and carried. It hits infrastructure. It wedges into places you did not expect. On Tuesday, April 29th, I got my first real caller who was breaking, a man named Jerome West. He said he was in a trailer park in the South Valley. He said his wife's inhaler was running out and the pharmacy was closed. He said he had driven to 3 places and could not find oxygen canisters or nebulizer supplies. He said his wife was sitting upright all night because lying down made it harder. He did not say panic words. He just kept repeating, "I do not know what to do." I asked him if he had a clean room set up, 1 bedroom, door sealed, fan filter running. He said no. He said he had tape, but he did not know what to tape. I talked him through it in plain steps. Pick the smallest room. Seal the windows with plastic if you have it. Towel at the door bottom. Fan with filter at the intake. If you have more than 1 filter, stack them in series with airflow, not all at once in one spot. Keep 1 exit path. Do not burn candles. Do not run a generator inside. Patricia came into the room while I was talking and wrote down Jerome's address. She sent a team if a team was available. I never found out if they got there. That was the new normal. You tell someone what to do. You do not get closure. That same week, we started hearing about dust pneumonia clusters in multiple states. People with no prior lung disease getting sick fast because fine particles inflamed airways and opened the door for infections. Emergency departments in Phoenix, El Paso, Lubbock, Denver, and Salt Lake City were reporting the same pattern. Elena told me by phone that her hospital had run low on high-flow oxygen equipment. She said they were reusing things that were meant to be disposable under emergency protocols. She said the staff was wearing respirators more than ever. She said people were showing up with red eyes, cracked lips, and skin that looked sanded. She did not dramatize it. She did not need to. At the county center, we started sleeping in shifts, cots in a back room, lights low, phones charging whenever the power held. The generator ran more often. It had a big diesel tank that was supposed to last several days. It lasted longer because we cycled it. Turn it on to top off batteries, to run the air system harder, to keep communications up. Turn it off to conserve. That sounds smart until you realize every generator start pulls dust through filters and screens and you spend half your time cleaning intakes. Jim built pre-filters out of foam and cloth. He rigged a cheap fan to blow across the intake screen to keep the worst of it from packing in. We swept dust off surfaces constantly. We put electronics in plastic bins when not in use. Dust gets into knobs and faders. It gets into connectors, it grinds, it shorts. It ruins contacts. We also learned about vehicles fast. People kept trying to drive and they kept getting stranded. Your car air filter is not built for this. Your cabin air filter is not built for this. In normal conditions, you change them every several months or once a year. In heavy dust, you can clog them in a day. Once your engine filter loads up, your engine performance drops. Your fuel economy drops. Your engine can stall. Your cabin can fill with dust because the ventilation system cannot push enough air. If you are stuck in a car and blowing dust, do not keep driving blind. Pull off the road as far as you can. Turn off your lights. Keep your foot off the brake. If you leave lights on, someone will aim for you. People drive toward lights when they cannot see. That is how pileups stack. Stay buckled. Turn your ventilation to recirculate, not outside. If your car has a fresh air setting, do not use it. Seal obvious leaks if you can. If you have a respirator, wear it. If you do not, cover your nose and mouth with cloth, and keep your eyes closed when you can. That is not comfort advice. That is survival advice. By early May, supply chains started snapping in visible ways. Grocery stores had empty aisles, not because food did not exist in the country, but because trucks were not moving reliably. Warehouses were short-staffed, and distribution centers were closing whenever visibility dropped. We got a report from a freight dispatcher in Amarillo who said truck stops were filling with rigs that could not move. Drivers were sleeping in cabs, running out of food, running out of clean filters. Some companies told drivers to park and wait. Waiting in a rig that is not sealed is not rest. It is exposure. We also heard about trains slowing down. Tracks need visibility at crossings. Yard operations need people on foot. Dust makes people slip, makes equipment jam, makes it harder to see signals. Aviation was already down in large regions. When you take away air freight, you lose fast resupply for medical items. Around May 8th, the first serious violence hit within Albuquerque over air and shelter, not food. A group tried to force their way into a community center that had better filtration. Another group tried to break into a clinic because they heard it had oxygen concentrators. Police responded slowly because patrol cars could not move safely. When police did arrive, it was in masks and goggles and heavy breathing through filters, and everything took longer. Patricia told me a thing that stuck. She said every emergency plan assumes responders can see. That is the core of it. When humans cannot see, everything breaks down. Not drama, logistics, enforcement, rescue, all of it. Elena stopped coming home. She stayed at the hospital with other staff. They turned a conference room into sleeping quarters. She said the hospital air system was holding barely. She said maintenance was swapping filters constantly and they were running out. Lucas stayed with my mother, Rosa, in a small house in the North Valley because her house had a newer heating system and fewer leaky windows. I did not want him traveling back and forth. He cried on the phone once and tried to hide it by talking about a video game. That hurt more than any news report. I kept broadcasting from the county center. Jim kept the equipment alive. Patricia kept trying to coordinate resources that were shrinking. Then the dust storms became continental. We got fragmented reports that parts of California were also getting heavy dust from the Central Valley and from desert regions. Las Vegas had extended zero visibility events. Salt Lake City had dust mixed with smoke from a grass fire that nobody could fully contain because the aircraft could not fly and ground crews could not see. We got a message relayed through a friend in Dallas that North Texas had seen dust so thick it tripped highway closure protocols for days. We got word from someone in St. Louis that the sky had turned brown and streetlights stayed on at noon. This was not a local problem anymore. It was a system problem.
Yeah.
At the end of May, the federal government tried to stabilize messaging. There were press conferences, but many people could not stream video anymore because networks were overloaded or power was intermittent. There were national alerts, but phones died when towers lost backup power. There were official statements about temporary conditions. That language made people angry. Temporary is something that you endure. This felt indefinite. The first big evacuation effort started from the most affected rural areas, where people relied on well water and had no filtration. County buses tried to move people into larger city shelters. City shelters filled fast and became targets because everyone knew they had cleaner air. That led to a brutal truth. In a dust storm apocalypse, clean air is currency. If you have a building with controlled filtration and backup power, you become a magnet. If you are a magnet, you need security. Security needs people, fuel, equipment, rules. Rules break under stress. In early June, Albuquerque started rationing diesel for critical infrastructure. The county center got a delivery with an escort. The hospital got deliveries with escorts. Water plants got deliveries with escorts. That meant regular people could not fill jerry cans even if they had money. Money stopped being the main gate. Access and force became the gates. I watched the change in people through the calls. At the beginning, callers asked for information. By June, callers asked for permission. Permission to break into a building. Permission to leave a neighbor behind. Permission to take someone's filter stash. They did not say it that way. They wrapped it in "what would you do?" I did not give permission. I gave reality. I told them what actions lead to escalation. I told them what would get them killed. I told them what could keep them alive without turning into monsters. Sometimes that worked. Sometimes the line went quiet and I knew the person had already decided. On June 9th, the county center took a direct hit from a crowd. It started at around 5:30 in the afternoon. Visibility outside was maybe 50 feet. Wind gusts were slamming the building. We heard shouting through the walls, muffled. The security camera feed on the monitor showed shapes moving near the front entrance. Patricia got on the internal radio and told staff to move away from exterior windows. Guards at the main doors put on face shields and respirators and set up inside barriers. The crowd was not huge, maybe 30 people, maybe more. Hard to count in dust. They were banging on the doors. They were holding signs that got ripped out of hands by wind. One guy had a crowbar. Another had a baseball bat. One woman was carrying a child wrapped in a blanket, face covered. That is the image that keeps replaying, not the weapons. The child. Patricia went to the entrance and spoke through a small speaker system. She told them the building was an emergency coordination site, not a shelter. She told them there was no space. She told them where the nearest public shelter was. Someone threw something. It hit the glass and bounced. Then the crowbar started striking. The glass held for a few hits. It was thick. It eventually cracked. 2 guards opened a side door and deployed pepper spray. I hate saying that. Pepper spray in a dust storm world is extra cruel because everyone is already fighting for breath. The guards did it because they were afraid. The crowd backed up coughing and yelling. The wind took the spray sideways and the guards got hit too. Everybody suffered. Nobody won. Then somebody fired a gun. One shot, not a burst, not chaos. One loud crack and then silence because dust eats sound fast. Everyone froze. The crowd scattered away from the doors, some stumbling. The guards pulled back inside and shut the side door. We did not see who fired. We did not see if anyone got hit. The camera feed was smeared with dust, and the lens was dirty. Patricia came back to our room, and her hands were shaking. She sat down and did not speak for a full minute. Then she said, "We have to move you." I asked where. She said the county had a secondary site underground, a records facility that had been upgraded after a flood years ago. It had better sealing. It had a dedicated filtration unit. It was not meant for public access. That meant it was less known. Less known meant safer. Jim looked tired in a way I had not seen on him before. He said we could move the gear in one run if we packed light. He said the antenna situation would be worse, but a weak signal was better than no signal. We started packing. That night, at 10:20, Jim and I loaded equipment into a county pickup with a topper. 2 portable batteries, the small transmitter, a microphone, cables, a basic mixer, and a laptop with recordings. We wore goggles, respirators, gloves. We wrapped gear in plastic bags inside bins. Driving through downtown Albuquerque in that dust felt illegal, not because of roadblocks, because it felt wrong to be moving when the world outside was invisible. We drove slow, hazards off, headlights on low beam because high beam just reflects back. Jim drove. I navigated by memory and by the faint shapes of buildings when we got close enough. We passed a stalled sedan at an intersection with nobody inside. The door was open. The seat was empty. The trunk was open too, and something was spilled on the ground. I do not know if it was groceries or medical supplies. I did not stop. That is another truth. Stopping gets you stranded. Stranded gets you dead. The secondary site was in an industrial area near the rail yards. I am not going to give an address. If you are not already close, you will not reach it safely. The building looked like a plain concrete box with a roll-up door. The entrance was on the side, behind a metal gate. We went inside and shut the door behind us fast. The air inside was better. Not clean, but better. The filter system hummed. You could smell dust faintly, but you could breathe without grit scraping your throat. That is what clean air feels like now. The absence of grit. We set up the microphone on a folding table next to shelves of boxed records. Jim ran cable to a small antenna mast that extended through a roof access port. He grounded it. He checked the power draw. He nodded. At 1:10 in the morning, I started broadcasting from that room.
Yeah.
If you are hearing this now, you are hearing the continuation of that line. June turned into July with no real break. The dust storms kept cycling. Sometimes the wind shifted, and we got a half day where the sky turned from brown to gray. People would go outside, sweep porches, try to clear solar panels. Then another surge would hit, and everything they did would be erased under a new layer. We learned to stop wasting energy on aesthetics. You do not keep your front steps clean in this world. You keep your air intake clean. You keep your filters sealed in bags. You keep your water stored. You keep your battery charged. The biggest lie people told themselves was that they could just run out for a minute. A minute outside in heavy dust can load your lungs. It can irritate your eyes enough that you rub them and grind grit under lids. It can make you cough so much you cannot keep a respirator sealed. It can make you dizzy. It can make you make stupid choices. By mid-July, the hospital Elena worked at had become a fortress. Not a dramatic fortress, a practical one. Controlled entry points, security screening, limited visitors, airlock-style procedures, staff living inside for stretches. Elena did not come home for 3 weeks. She called when she could. Sometimes the call dropped. Sometimes she texted one word and then nothing for days. When she did talk, her voice was flat from exhaustion. She told me Lucas was staying stable with my mother. She told me she was proud of me for keeping this going. She told me not to do anything heroic. I told her I loved her. I told her I was sorry. Those two phrases became my whole emotional vocabulary. Around the same time, we started hearing confirmed reports of international disruption that matched what we were living through. Northern China had massive dust events spreading into cities that were not prepared for that scale. Parts of India and Pakistan had dust mixed with heat so severe that outdoor work became deadly. The Middle East had sandstorms pushing into urban centers for days at a time. Australia had major dust storms in areas already strained by drought. Global shipping slowed because ports could not operate cranes safely in zero visibility winds. Planes stayed grounded. Manufacturing that depended on just-in-time delivery stalled. Medical supply chains buckled. If you think your town is isolated, it is not. Your inhaler depends on a factory. Your factory depends on parts. Your parts depend on trucks. Trucks depend on visibility, diesel, filters, and drivers who can breathe. In late July, we lost regular internet access at the secondary site. We still had some internal county network functions. We still had radio relays with other emergency sites. We lost most of the outside stream. That forced us back into a more old-style communication pattern. Messages passed person to person. Reports came in delayed. Information got stale fast. That is when rumors started killing people. A rumor that a certain grocery warehouse was distributing supplies caused a rush that turned into a fight in the parking lot and ended with multiple injuries and one death. A rumor that the city was evacuating people by bus to Colorado caused families to pack and drive into the worst visibility, chasing a thing that did not exist. A rumor that the water had been poisoned caused some people to stop drinking tap water and dehydrate. So I started doing a pattern. Every broadcast I said what I knew, what I did not know, and what I could not confirm. I said it in blunt language. People got mad sometimes because they wanted certainty. I could not give it. If you are hearing this, and you are angry at me for not giving you hope, save your anger for something that deserves it. Hope does not change the fact that dust blocks your lungs. Plans do.
And that
Here are the plans that actually worked for people I stayed in contact with. 1. Build a clean room, not your whole house. One room. Smaller is easier. Seal windows with plastic and tape. Seal the door edges as much as you can while still letting it open. Put towels at the bottom. Run a box fan with a furnace filter taped to the intake. If you have a second fan, set it up too. Keep that room the place you sleep. Keep it the place you retreat when dust surges. Keep it clean. Do not walk in wearing outside clothes. 2. Protect your filters. Store unused filters in sealed plastic bags. Do not leave them sitting out in a dusty room. Do not handle them with dusty hands. Do not run them longer than needed. Swap when airflow drops. If your fan sounds strained, your filter is loading. 3. Stop going outside for non-critical tasks. If you have to go out, cover your eyes. Use goggles if you have them. Use a respirator if you have it. If you do not, use layered cloth. It is not ideal. It is better than raw air. Keep the trip short. Come back in. Strip outer layer. Bag it. Rinse exposed skin. 4. Conserve water. Dust will make you want to rinse constantly. Rinse only what matters. Face and hands. Eyes with clean water if you can. Do not waste drinking water on floors unless you are preventing slips or removing thick buildup. Use dry sweeping methods carefully. Vacuum with a good filter if you have one. A cheap vacuum without good filtration can blow fine dust back into your air. 5. Do not run internal combustion engines without extra intake protection. That includes generators. If you must run a generator, build a pre-filter on the intake using foam and cloth. Clean it often. Keep the generator sheltered from direct wind. Never run it indoors. Carbon monoxide kills fast and silent. I am not going to soften that. 6. Do not trust your car as shelter for long durations. Cars leak. Their filters clog. Their window seals are not designed for fine dust under pressure. A car can get you from one building to another if visibility allows. It is not a safe house. Those are the boring steps. They are still the difference between life and death for a lot of people. Now I'm going to tell you about the day we almost lost everything at the secondary site. It was August 3rd, 2027. The wind had been building for 2 days, steady with gusts that shook the building. The dust outside was thick enough that the security lights looked dim at noon. Jim was on the roof access hatch cleaning the antenna base and checking the seal around the cable pass-through. He came down coughing and pointed at the intake vent for the filtration unit. It was clogging. Not slowly, rapidly. The pre-screen was packing with dust and debris. He had already cleaned it twice that day. The filtration unit alarmed. Pressure differential too high. That means airflow dropping. Airflow dropping means inside air quality will degrade because you cannot maintain positive pressure against outside dust. When positive pressure fails, dust finds every crack and comes in. We had backup filters stored, but the unit needed time to shut down and swap without blasting dust through the system. Jim moved fast. He shut down the fan. He waited for the system to settle. He opened the panel. Dust puffed out anyway. He swore once, quietly, and kept working. I was in the broadcast room, watching the dust creep under the door seam in a faint line. That line was the warning. The building was starting to lose its advantage. Patricia was not with us that day. She was at the main county center dealing with shelter coordination and security. We were alone, 2 guys in a records warehouse, trying to keep clean air and a weak signal alive. Jim got the filter swapped. He restarted the unit. For 10 minutes, the air improved again. Then the alarm went off again. That meant the outside dust load was so intense that the new filter was clogging fast, or the intake screen was packing again. We went outside into the loading bay area, still inside the building envelope, but closer to the exterior door, and we could hear grit hitting the metal roll-up door. It sounded constant. You could feel vibration through the floor. Jim said we might have to shut down intake entirely and ride internal air. Riding internal air means you are on a timer. Carbon dioxide rises. Oxygen stays, but the air gets heavy and stale. Dust still seeps in through leaks. Heat builds if you cannot run cooling. In a sealed room with 2 people, you can last hours. Maybe longer if you manage it carefully. It is still a clock. We made the call. We shut down the intake fan. We sealed interior doors. We moved into the smallest interior room we had, the broadcast room plus the adjacent storage closet. We turned off unnecessary power to reduce heat. We drank small amounts of water. We spoke quietly because there was no point wasting air on arguments. I kept broadcasting. I kept it short. I told people in the region that a severe dust surge was happening into shelter. I told people not to go outside even if it looked calmer. I told them visibility could drop to near 0 in minutes. And Jim sat across from me with goggles on his head and his respirator still on even though we were inside. He did not trust the room. He was probably right. After about 2 hours, the dust impact sound on the building eased slightly. Jim went to check the intake screen. He opened the exterior side access panel for the intake and got hit with a blast of dust that coated his face shield. He slammed it shut and came back in shaking his head. He said the screen was packed solid, not coated. Packed. He said it looked like someone had plastered it. He said if we restarted the system without clearing it, the fan motor could burn out or the system could collapse the filter. We waited. Late that night, around 11:10, the wind dropped enough that Jim could go outside for 30 seconds at a time to clear the screen. He wore a respirator with fresh cartridges and a hooded jacket. He held his breath during the seconds he stepped into the worst gust. He scraped the screen clean with a tool, then ran back inside. He repeated it over and over. By 1:30 in the morning, we had airflow back. We both sat against the wall and closed our eyes for a minute. Not sleep. Just shutting down the brain for 60 seconds. That was the night I realized this was not a storm problem. It was an environment problem. The baseline had changed. The air itself had become an adversary. In mid-August, Albuquerque started moving people into fewer, more controlled shelters and closing smaller ones that could not keep air clean. That sounds harsh. It was practical. A shelter that fills with dust is a trap. People will get sick inside it, and then you have a medical emergency inside your shelter. Some churches with newer systems did well. Some schools with modern filtration did well for a while. Older buildings failed fast. Mobile home parks suffered. People in older adobe homes sometimes did better because thick walls and fewer vents helped, but only if windows and doors were tight. We also saw a pattern with wealth. People with newer homes, better windows, multiple air cleaners, and the ability to stock filters did better. People without that got hit first. That is not morality. It is physics plus money. By September, the city's visible population had shrunk. Some people left early, heading north toward places that still had periodic clear air. Some people went west toward the mountains, thinking elevation would save them. Elevation helps sometimes, but dust can climb. Wind does not care about your plan. Some people died. Some people disappeared. Some people moved into larger shelters and stayed. Some people barricaded in place and stopped answering calls. Neighborhoods went quiet, not because they were safe, but because nobody wanted to waste energy making noise. That is when my broadcast turned into more of a diary. Less call in, more telling what happened to me and what I observed, because the phone systems were unreliable and most people were conserving battery. I'm going to jump to the hardest part now, the part where my family stops being a set of voices on the phone and becomes the center of the story again. September 12th, 2027, Elena called me from the hospital and told me the hospital was going to evacuate critical patients to a facility in northern New Mexico that had better air and more stable power. She said the move would happen in a convoy with National Guard escort. She said staff could volunteer to go. She said she was going. I asked about Lucas. She said Lucas needed to come too. She said my mother could not keep him safe if the neighborhood air got worse and power failed. She said the hospital could not keep staff families, but the convoy route would pass near my mother's house and she could pick Lucas up if I could get him ready. That was the first time in months I felt real urgency that was not abstract. This was not people out there. This was my kid, my wife, a convoy, a route, a window of time. I called my mother. The call dropped twice. On the third try, she answered and her voice sounded older than I remembered. She told me she was fine. She told me Lucas was asleep in the clean room she set up. She told me she had enough food for weeks. I told her Elena was coming with a convoy and Lucas had to be ready to move. My mother went quiet, then said, "Pack him. I will have him at the door." I asked if she wanted to come too. She said no. She said she would slow them down. She said she had lived her life. She said Lucas needed a future. She said it in a flat voice that meant she had already decided. That is when I broke one of the rules Elena gave me. I left the secondary site. Jim tried to stop me. He said the roads were bad. He said visibility was dropping again. He said the county might need the signal. I told him I understood. I told him I had to go anyway. I grabbed a county vehicle with permission from Patricia after a quick radio exchange. She did not like it. She gave me the approval because she understood what families do to logic. She told me to be back within 12 hours. She told me if I got stranded, nobody was coming for me. I told her I understood. I drove to the North Valley at about 9 in the morning. The wind was moderate, visibility maybe a quarter mile at best, sometimes less. I stayed off the freeway. I drove slow. I used landmarks I could still see. When I got to my mother's street, the neighborhood looked abandoned. Not destroyed, just shut. Cars parked, curtains closed, dust piled in drifts against fences. The air had that constant grit smell. My mother opened the door only enough to slide Lucas out. She had him wearing swim goggles and a small respirator, size for a child, the kind used in industrial settings. She had a backpack on him. She had a second bag in her hand. Lucas saw me and tried to smile. He did not cry. He walked to the vehicle and got in. He looked back at my mother, then at me. He did not ask questions. That is how much kids absorb without talking. I told my mother one more time to come. She shook her head. She said, "Go, close the door. Do not let the dust in." I wanted to hug her. I did not. I could not risk bringing dust into her clean room. I stood there for a second, nodded, and shut the vehicle door. Lucas and I drove to the convoy pickup point Elena had given me, a hospital-affiliated clinic with a covered loading area. The plan was for Elena to swing by with the convoy, take Lucas, and continue north. I would return to the county site. That was the plan. Plans got eaten by reality fast. We waited under the clinic awning with the engine off to conserve fuel and reduce dust intake. I kept Lucas inside the vehicle with recirculation on. I sat outside the vehicle with my respirator on because there was not enough clean air inside if both of us stayed sealed in there for long. At 11:30, a National Guard vehicle rolled in, lights off, slow. 2 soldiers got out wearing goggles and respirators. One of them, a sergeant named Klein, asked my name. I told him. He checked a paper list. Paper. That is how far things had rolled back. He told me the convoy was delayed because one of the ambulances had broken down south of town. Dust had clogged the intake and the engine overheated. They were swapping vehicles. Klein told me to stay put. He told me if the wind picked up, get inside the clinic building because it had better filtration than the parking lot. He told me not to wander. He said people were desperate and some groups had started targeting convoys for fuel and medical supplies. At 1:10 in the afternoon, the wind shifted and got worse. Dust thickened. The clinic doors opened and the staff waved us in. Inside, the air was better but not great. The waiting room was full of people sitting with masks, eyes red, holding bags. Some were there for the convoy. Some were there because they had nowhere else. Lucas sat next to me and leaned against my arm. He did not speak much. He watched the door. Every time it opened, dust tried to push in and staff rushed to close it. At 3:40, Elena arrived. She came in wearing hospital scrubs under a heavy jacket, goggles, respirator. She looked at Lucas and her eyes changed. She took his face in her hands for 1 second, then she checked his straps and his backpack. She asked me if he had eaten. I said yes. I handed her a small bag of snacks and water I had packed. She told me the convoy was smaller than planned. 2 ambulances, 1 box truck with supplies, 3 guard vehicles. She said they were moving only the worst patients and a limited number of staff. She said the northern facility had strict intake because their air system could not handle endless numbers. I asked if she could take me too. She shook her head. She said she could not. She said she had already pushed to get Lucas on the list. She said if I forced it, the guard would turn all of us away. That was the moment I had to decide whether I was a husband, or a father, or a broadcaster, or all of it at once. I hated it. I still hate it. I kissed Lucas through the edge of his mask. I told him he had to listen to his mom. I told him he had to drink water even if he did not feel thirsty. I told him he had to keep his goggles on outside even if other kids took theirs off. I told him I would find them. He asked me if my mother was coming. I told him no. I told him my mother was safe. I lied a little by calling it safe. I said it anyway because kids cannot carry the full weight. Elena squeezed my hand once. She said, "Stay inside. Keep talking. Do not die on the road trying to chase us." Then she left with Lucas. I watched the convoy pull out through the dust. Lights faint, shapes swallowed fast. I stood in the clinic doorway until a nurse pulled me back inside and shut the door. I drove back to the secondary site that night with my head full of static. The roads were worse. Visibility dropped in bursts. I had to stop twice under an overpass and wait out gusts because I could not see lane edges. I kept telling myself one phrase: do not die stupid. I made it back at 2:20 in the morning. Jim was still there. He looked relieved and angry at the same time. He did not lecture me. He handed me a bottle of water and told me to sit down. I sat. I stared at the microphone. I went on air and told people the truth in the plainest words I had. The hospitals were overwhelmed. Convoys were limited. Northern facilities were not magic. The dust was not ending soon. If you had shelter, improve it. If you had no shelter, find the nearest location with real filtration and controlled entry, and do not assume you can force your way in without consequences. That broadcast is the point where I stopped pretending this was a temporary emergency. I started talking to people as if we were building a new normal. Now I'm in December. It is cold outside at night. The dust still comes. Cold helps in one way. People do not go outside as much. Cold hurts in another way. Heating systems pull air. Filters clog. If you burn fuel indoors, you risk carbon monoxide. If you lose power, you freeze. In Albuquerque, a few pockets still have power most days. Some neighborhoods have microgrids. Some hospitals run on generators. Some water plants keep pressure steady. Large areas are dark more often than not. Downtown is quieter than I ever saw it, even during the pandemic years. I have not seen my wife or my son in person since September. I got one message from Elena in October through a relay. She said they reached the northern facility near Santa Fe. She said the air was better there, but still dusty. She said Lucas had started school again in a small classroom with air cleaners humming all day. She said he drew a picture of me with a microphone and wrote, "Dad talks to people." That message kept me alive in a way food does not. I do not know how long I can keep this broadcast going. Diesel is rationed tight. Filters are scarce. Jim is running out of replacement parts. The county support is thinner every week. More staff quit or left or got sick. More sites went dark. So I'm going to end this transmission with a checklist, and then I'm going to keep talking until the power drops again. If you hear this later, write it down. If you hear this now, do it in the morning when the wind is lowest. 1. Pick one room to protect. Seal it. Run filtration. Keep it clean. 2. Store water in clean containers. Do not assume tap pressure will stay stable. 3. Do not waste filters. Protect them from ambient dust. Swap only when airflow drops. 4. If you have a generator, protect its intake and do not run it in heavy gusts unless you have to. Clean it after each run. 5. Do not travel in low visibility unless you have no other option. Vehicles fail, roads become traps, rescue is rare. 6. Do not trust rumors. Confirm with at least 2 independent sources when possible. If you cannot confirm, act conservatively. 7. If you are in charge of other people, do not burn trust for short-term gain. In this world, trust is an actual resource. It keeps groups from killing each other over filters. I am going to keep talking now. I am going to keep telling you what I see from this city, from these reports, from the small lines of communication we still have. If you can hear me, you are not alone in your room. That does not fix your air. It does not fix your power. It does fix one thing. You have a witness.